Imagine for a moment that something you thought was, well, maybe a distant dream or perhaps just a concept for the future. Something maybe planned for 2036 or Agenda 2063. Imagine that it's actually already happening, not openly, not debated, but quietly taking shape. We're talking about the silent emergence of a One Africa government. And if the claims we've been looking into are accurate, you might already be, well, part of it. So, our deep dive today is exploring a set of really quite extraordinary claims. These come from sources like data leaks from anonymous engineers in Ghana and Kenya, whistleblowers in Ethiopia, and also some highly placed sources inside the African Union itself, all compiled and reported by Supreme Africa Breaking News. So our mission for you, the listener, is to carefully unpack these claims, try to understand the evidence they're presenting, and just see how this alleged continental superstate could already be forming, seemingly, behind our backs without much public debate or a vote. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, what's fascinating here is exactly that contrast you pointed out. Most people, I think, even those who follow African affairs quite closely, would probably put a One Africa government firmly in the long-term aspiration box, maybe, decades away. But the core assertion in these revelations is that it's not just an idea anymore. It's an ongoing operational reality that's been quietly unfolding.
And that's exactly the core claim, isn't it? That's where we have to start. These insiders, according to Supreme Africa Breaking News, are saying the actual structure of a One Africa government has, quote, already started operating quietly behind closed doors. It's not a future proposal. They're saying it is already here, it is already working. And the scope they describe is pretty vast, from secret legislative alignments, new continental digital systems, even joint military decisions. The sources suggest these foundations for a superstate are already being laid, and the public is, well, largely unaware. Now, turning to the digital evidence, this is where the claims get really intricate. The sources point specifically to something called the One Africa Digital Infrastructure Hub, or OADH. According to these data leaks, apparently from engineers contracted in Ghana and Kenya, this OADH already holds partial records on over 175 million Africans. That's a staggering number. And we're talking about some very personal data here. Things like national ID crosslinks, voting behavior patterns, tax registration details, mobile money integration, even biometric data, apparently from health records and SIM card registrations. And the claim is, while a lot of this data started out in national projects, it's now being linked across borders using new protocols allegedly developed and funded by AU-linked fintech labs, specifically mentioning places like Lagos, Nigeria. These labs apparently specialize in this cross-border integration.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these whistleblower accounts, they give a very direct sort of human angle on this seemingly invisible process. You have an engineer, someone who supposedly worked on data harmonization for an AU pilot program, quoted as saying, "We were syncing tax records with biometric SIM data. Didn't feel national, it felt continental." That's quite a statement.
It really is.
And then there's a whistleblower from Ethiopia who reportedly revealed, "We uploaded voter ID details for cross-analysis." They're apparently told it was just to help unify African elections, but crucially, not that it was already part of this One Africa rollout. But maybe the most striking insight comes from a systems architect, someone supposedly involved in building these systems. Their warning was pretty stark. People think the system is being designed. It's already running. They go on to say, "The day you received your SIM-link ID, you essentially entered the One Africa system. This is no longer preparation. It's participation, and it happened without a single public vote." That's the claim.
So the implication here, for you listening, for the ordinary African citizen, is that you might not realize it, but behind the apps you use every day, maybe your e-wallet, your health ID, voter portal, the back-end servers, allegedly, are already connecting into these bigger continental data links. It's an integration that's happening silently, almost, invisibly in the background. Okay, so if this data is being collected continent-wide, what about the bureaucracy? What kind of administrative bodies would you even need? Well, the sources do touch on this. Over the past year, AU insiders allegedly confirmed to Supreme Africa Breaking News the creation of 3 new directorates. They're described as functioning like shadow ministries. First, a Department of Continental Digital Identity, reportedly overseeing a One Africa ID pilot rollout, which they say is already active in 5 countries. Second, an African Continental Revenue Authority, ACRA, apparently testing cross-border tax harmonization. And third, the AU Strategic Command and Operations Bureau, OSCUIO. This one's supposedly coordinating joint drills and military data exchange across more than 16 armies. And these directorates, we're told they aren't public-facing. They're operational, but behind the scenes. Their reporting structure is also quite interesting. They apparently report directly to something called the One Africa Coordination Corps, described as a kind of hidden council of commissioners and regional heads. And these people supposedly meet biweekly under AU protection, rotating between Pretoria, Nairobi, and Addis Ababa. Now, here's what the sources flag is really concerning. None of this, they claim, has been publicly debated in the AU Parliament. None of it reported by mainstream African media, and definitely none of it put to a referendum. So, okay, given the sheer scale of these claims, how? How is this allegedly pulled off so quietly, without everyone knowing, without a democratic process? While the sources claim it started, perhaps strategically, with the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA, signed by almost everyone, 54 out of 55 countries. Now, AfCFTA was mostly marketed as a trade pact, right?
Right, that was the public face of it.
But these reports suggest that buried deep in the legal text, it actually created a framework for much more. Shared regulations, standardized customs, a central arbitration system, basically laying the groundwork. And from that base, the AE allegedly started testing programs. Under that cover, they were called pilot programs initially. But now, according to these sources, they're being merged into one interoperable system coordinated by this body they call the Council for Unified Africa. Examples given include things like a One Africa e-passport prototype, which is for diplomats so far, a unified procurement portal for defense equipment, digital ID integration for regional banking laws. Little pieces, maybe. And then there's a legislative angle, these new African laws. We're told over 30 African countries have passed laws that mirror AU resolutions almost word for word, covering cybersecurity, border control, tax harmonization, ID management, military cooperation. Some apparently rushed through under emergency powers, maybe during crises. Others just enacted without much public explanation. Together, the claim is they form a kind of silent legal chain.
Yeah, and this naturally raises a really important question. What about the national leaders, the presidents? Are they just unaware, or is there, some level of agreement here? The sources are quite direct on this. They claim, quote, most presidents are already in on it. Apparently, they attend AU briefings. They've agreed in principle to become essentially state governors under this One Africa government, maybe by 2036. And some had suggested might even want it sooner, before 2030. If the military backing and the AU funding lines up, it's presented by these sources almost as a political survival game now for these leaders. And it goes even further. The reports talk about a parallel constitution. A draft document titled The Constitutional Framework for the Union of African States is apparently already circulating internally. It's described as being maybe 80% complete, and it supposedly outlines key elements like a rotating AU presidency, 5 regions, 1 term each, a continental legislature with veto powers, a Supreme Court in Addis Ababa, even 1 tax system, 1 currency, 1 foreign policy voice.
That's ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. And there's a quote attributed to an AU legal insider. We are building it quietly, relentlessly.
Which brings us right back to that crucial question. Why? Why all this alleged secrecy? If these claims hold any water, why would such a massive undertaking be kept out of the public eye? Well, according to one insider quoted, someone from AU Legal Affairs, they said, there's fear that if people knew how far things have already gone, there would be panic or protest. So the approach is bid first, explain later. That's the justification given. And the reasons cited for this secrecy are pretty stark. Revealing it too soon, they claim, could spark nationalism, invite sabotage, even unravel weaker nations. So measures were allegedly taken, engineers under NDAs, AU officials warned to keep quiet. Media apparently kept silent. And the implication, according to the source, is quite chilling. Once people are integrated into the system, resistance becomes much harder, as the report sort of summarizes it. While you were busy surviving, they were integrating. While you argued about elections, they rewrote the system. While you waited to vote, the system logged you in. The suggestion is stark. Africa has already merged. So finally, what does the report suggest happens next? Is there a timeline? We're told to expect things like expanded visa-free zones, appointment of new regional governors, more AU-wide military drills, and maybe even a digital wallet launch continent-wide by 2027. The proponents, the source claims, will eventually frame it as the people's dream, sure. But as the report starkly puts it, you were never asked. And the ultimate announcement, the prediction is, when they announce it in 2036, just remember, the One Africa government didn't begin that day. It began behind your back, and you're already integrated.
Now, whether you view these potential developments as ultimately good or dangerous, the source material does present both sides, or at least acknowledges them. Supporters, it says, envision African unity, economic independence, stronger defense, shared wealth, long-held Pan-African ideals.
Sure, the potential upsides.
Exactly. But critics, on the other hand, raise very serious concerns. Lack of public consent is a big one. potential loss of national or local identity, and the worry about creating a kind of technocratic dictatorship built entirely in silence. But regardless of where you might stand on that debate, the source's core assertion keeps coming back. The mechanisms are already being put in place and individuals are already participating, often, perhaps, without even realizing it.
Well, this deep dive has certainly presented us with, a potentially unsettling picture that this one Africa government is being described by these sources not as some far-off dream, but as a quiet, ongoing reality, with its foundations allegedly woven into the very fabric of daily life and continental governance already.
And I think this raises a really important question, doesn't it? For you, the listener, and just for governance more broadly. What does it actually mean when such fundamental changes, these huge shifts, are pursued outside of, well, traditional public discussion and democratic processes?
It's definitely something to think about, isn't it? We certainly encourage you to consider these insights, maybe reflect on your own digital life and how it connects to these wider systems. As always, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep thinking critically about the information you encounter.